to Acts, the 4th chapter. This is where we're going to spend our time today. Acts chapter 4. In order to even talk about what's going on here, there's got to be a little background done so that we've got the history up to the point of what we're looking at today and what it means. You've got so much that's going on. Pentecost has already happened. Peter has now preached 2 sermons on the temple steps, and pretty successful. I mean, 8,000 converts, that's pretty good. I think any modern day evangelist would be pretty happy with that. There's the resistance then of the temple officials. They don't like the fact that the temple steps are being used to preach a doctrine that they don't think is a proper one at all, this false Messiah in their minds. And so the temple officials see to it that Peter and John are arrested and taken before the Sanhedrin. And they're accused of stirring up this difficulty, and they're told, we don't want you to preach in this name any longer. The problem is there's been a man healed, and everybody has seen that. And so now not only do they have this clout to preach, they've got somebody who's been healed, so now the crowd's kind of with them. And so the temple officials are treading on some dangerous territory here. They don't know how to handle this, and so finally they let them go and just say, please don't do this anymore, which of course was a waste of their breath because Peter and John are going to do what they've been doing now all this time. They're not going to be stopped. That brings us up to this moment where Peter and John have returned to the group of people from which they have come, that 120 that we saw on Pentecost. And so let's take a look at the text and see what it would tell us. And I'll begin reading in Acts chapter 4, verse 23. When they were released, Peter and John went to their fellow believers and reported everything that the high priests and the elders had said to them. When the crowd that was gathered there, the believers, heard this, they raised their voices to God with one mind and said, Master of all, you who made the heaven, the earth, and the sea, and everything that's in them, and who through the Holy Spirit said, through your servant David, our forefather, why do the nations rage? Why do the people do these plot foolish things? The kings of the earth stood together, and the rulers assembled together against the Lord and against his Christ. For indeed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate with the Gentiles and the people of Israel assembled together in this city against your holy Messiah, Jesus, whom you had anointed, to do as much as your power had decided and your plan had decided beforehand would be allowed to happen. And now, Lord, pay attention to their threats and grant your servants to speak your message with great courage while you extend your hand to heal and to bring about miraculous signs and wonders through the name of your holy servant, Jesus. When they had prayed, the place where they were assembled was shaken, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak the word of God courageously. Now, if this were in a magazine, if this moment were in a magazine, you probably could find all kinds of ways to title this moment. Perhaps it is titled, Peter and John Return Because They're Emptied Out. That would be a good title for it, I think. So if they're coming back to this congregation that they've gathered with prior, who has sent them out to go to the temple steps and preach, they're returning for a reason. So that brings to me a question about us, a direct question about all of us in this room right now who are gathered here today. What are we doing here? I think that's a legitimate question. Why do we come here? What's the point of it? I mean, is it to sing a few songs and to listen to Rip drone on for 25 minutes and to pray a prayer, join in a congregational prayer and shake some hands and drink some coffee and eat a few Little Debbie's oatmeal cream pies and head back home? I mean, what's the purpose for it? There's got to be some reason we're here. Let me just relate to you something here that I think, for me personally, is important. A couple of things. I come here, I can't speak for anybody else in this room. I come here every Sunday, as I have since I became a believer. I come with some expectation here. Always. I expect that through something that happens here on any given Sunday, that either I'm going to see God use one of you in my life, or God's going to use me, or that something's going to happen here where I'm going to see God do something in the life that he's given me to live that makes me different than when I came in. That's my expectation. Every Sunday. And I'm not saying that to put that out as some kind of challenge for anybody. I'm just telling you exactly where it is for me. I prepare a sermon. This is the beauty of, I look at it as a gift. I get to go home on Monday morning. I get up at 5:30. And I sit down at the computer and I look through the common lectionary and various things, and I find a text that seems like there's something about this text that might say something to the congregation here on a Sunday that might be meaningful. And so I start an outline and I work on the outline. And then I take the outline, after I've prepared it, out to the building where I have a little off building from the house. And I stand there and I do the sermon. A lot of times before I ever do it here, many, many times over. I don't do that so that I get used to it. I do it because I'm telling you, this is so exciting to me. I don't know any other word to put to it. Is that God uses that outline as I work at it. I edit it, change it. The outline I started with is not the outline I wind up with, because I see God giving me things to say. Now, whether they're for you or not, that's going to be up to you to a large extent. But God does that, and it's so life-changing for me, because now whatever I've got here has done something to me before I ever get up here. That means something to me. And I would say when I was a congregation member, it was the same. When I was in the congregation just as a spectator, the fact that there would be something going on where I could participate in it in some way. Maybe it was a Sunday school class where I could ask questions or participate in the Sunday school. Those moments of participation are exactly what I'm talking about. We're participating together here. That's what the church is for. I'll never forget it one Sunday. Or no, it was a Wednesday night. And our missionaries to Mexico were here, and I was at the back because Joan almost always sings a song when they come to do their deputation. And so I'm back there, and you know how it is when you're in a congregational setting and you hear your name called out from the front. You know, hot sweat pops out. I mean, if you weren't awake then, you're awake now, right? And so I heard my name called out from the back, and the question was, Brother Rip, what's the church for? The Brother Rip part's the part that cued me in right away. And I thought, gosh, I know where she's fishing here, but it's not the right answer. She said, 10 seconds go by when you're talking like that. If 10 seconds go by and somebody's not answered you, you're going to answer for them, because it's a little uncomfortable after 10 seconds and silence. And I'm just staring at her with that kind of Homer Simpson, two bug eyes looking back at her. I'm not really ready to answer the question. She says, oh, it's to get people born again. That is not the purpose for the church. That's the purpose for you and me. This gathering is for a different purpose. This gathering is so that we make disciples of ourselves. That God uses this moment to make disciples. So that you and I come here and are changed. And the reason that Peter and John come back to this group is so that they can be filled back up to go back to the temple steps. Because what they were doing had emptied them out. And it's not a good thing for a believer to be empty. When I was traveling with the first band I traveled with, please take this as real advice. Do not ever get talked into, as a church or as an individual, into buying a large diesel bus. Do not do that. It's really bad. If you have a water pump breakdown, you take your Jeep or your van or whatever it is to the place, and it might be $200-300 to get a water pump put in. It was $3,000 to get a water pump put in the bus. The bus will financially crush you. The bus we had, big diesel bus, 10 tons, had no fuel gauge. So when we would drive, I remember one time we were coming out of Miami, and what's the name of that road? Is it called the Gator Parkway? Is it the one that comes out of Miami and goes all the way through the Everglades and gets you back into civilization?
Tamiami Trail.
That sounds right. We'll call it that. Anyway, it's a long straight road and there's nothing there. And so I always got graveyard shift. 2 o'clock in the morning, the person that was driving comes back and gets me up. Rip, shakes me. I'm sound asleep. Rip, it's time for you to drive. Okay. So I go and I get in the seat at 2 in the morning, and he says to me, we bought fuel just back there. So you've probably got 500 miles of fuel left in the tank. I said, well, that's good. So I just put that out of my mind and started driving. The next thing I know, I'm driving along, it's just about daylight, and the bus starts to slow down. My foot hasn't moved on the accelerator pedal, so I know something's wrong. And pretty soon I'm on the side of the road with the flashers going, the bus has stopped. Well, of course, that wakes him up. He comes forward and he says, what's going on? I said, I don't know, it won't go. Try to crank it, it won't crank. We had a dowel, a 4-foot piece of wood that we used to check the fuel because it's a 150-gallon fuel tank with no gauge on it. So we took the dowel and you would stick it down in the tank, and at the angle you stuck it at, you'd bring it out and look at it and turn it and say, okay, we've got this much fuel. That's how we gauge the fuel. We put it down there and all we have is a drop on the end of the dowel. We're empty. I got blamed for it, but that's okay. The point is, we're just like that as believers. People that think that they can go along as a believer and not gather will find themselves empty over time. That's just how it is. God has engineered it this way. So the apostles have given themselves out. Do you think that the apostles, Peter and John, are like the modern evangelists? Where the modern evangelist, I've been to lots of these conferences in my life, where the evangelist comes, I've even seen him come in a limousine. The evangelist comes, limousine door opens, the evangelist is in the slick suit, walks out, does a 20, 30-minute talk, goes back to the limousine, goes back to the hotel. I guarantee you Peter and John didn't do that. They probably were there talking to people, they praying for people for hours. Who knows how long they were there, and they were spent by what they had done. Think of the emotion for Peter and John to be dragged in front of the Sanhedrin. If you're a good Jewish boy, and you get dragged in front of the Sanhedrin, you're in trouble. There's a lot of emotion that would go along with that. You're spent. Well, if you and I are actually being used by God in this world, I can promise you this. You can put this in the bank. You will be opposed. You're going to be opposed. We are going to be opposed. And so ask any missionary, talk to any missionary about their life as a missionary and ask them, are you opposed in your mission work? And there's not one missionary on this planet that's going to say no. We are opposed. There are 3 types of people in the world, I think. 3 types. One is, and I say this with reverence, but if we take the Bible seriously, this is it. This is the first category. They are assets to Satan. Now, nobody thinks that, right? When I was not a Christian, I didn't think of myself as in a red union suit as an asset to Satan with a pitchfork and doing bad things everywhere. I didn't think like that at all. But if Jesus has told us the truth, everybody who doesn't know him as Savior and Lord is an asset to Satan. Sorry about that. The second category is born again. So that means a person gets taken out of the asset to Satan pile and put into the born again pile. But then there's a third category. Those are people who start to be used by God and become liabilities to Satan. And when that happens, you become a target. That's just how it is. That's the world we live in. As Peter says, we are strangers here. This is not our home. And so we're going to be opposed. And think of it like this. No matter what you and I choose to do, if we say, I'm going to follow Jesus and I'm going to be used, I'm going to make myself useful, it's going to cost us something. It's going to cost us lost sleep, maybe, tension, money, time, energy. Maybe there's something we really dig doing, some fun thing that we really like, and we have to give it up because a phone call comes that says, I need you to do this now. And as a follower of Jesus, we get taken out of it. And so the fixed commodity of life that you and I have, it's fixed. When somebody says, I'm going to spend time doing X, whatever that is we're doing, that's the most literal thing about your life that we can possibly say. Because that's exactly what happens. We spend time. We never get it back. We never save it. Time right now is going away. All of it. It's always going away. And we will spend that time and spend ourselves in some way. And if we're following Jesus, we're going to spend it in such a way as that we're going to be opposed. And it's going to cost us something. Peter and John had spent themselves, so they came back to the group of people to be filled back up. That's why they're there. You know, some of the most peaceful people you will ever meet in your life are those who say, I'm a follower of Jesus, but they do not ever spend themselves for Jesus at all. Everything's good, fun. I've settled that issue of death now. That's taken care of. But as for the rest of it, I'm at peace. Well, of course. Think about it like this. Let's say a person they're born again and they want to be used by God, but they're physically unable. They can still pray for people. Don't think for a second that praying for people on a consistent basis is not hard to do. It's hard. It takes discipline and effort. And a person spends themselves doing that. Jesus said it and guess what? When you start doing that, what will happen is inevitably the phone will ring. And now the people for whom you're praying, you're going to have to invest in their life in some way that's going to cost something. Always. Never fails. And it's supposed to be that way. Jesus said this. He said, my peace I give to you. And we love that. I love the first part of that, don't you? I want that peace. The second part we don't think much about. Not as the world gives. There is a measure of peace to be found in the world. It's there. And believe me, the enemy of God will find every measure of that kind of peace to bring to us to keep us from being a liability to him. If Satan can fill us up with hobbies and diversions and fun and everything around us that's going to take us away from being spent for the gospel and being spent for Jesus' sake, he'll readily supply it. Readily. Why not? It's no big deal to him. And it keeps us from being a liability. And he will supply those things. And they will be some of the most fulfilling and fun things that we could possibly imagine. I'm not going to say when or where, but I've got friends that are just like that. They say they love the Lord. I don't doubt them. They say they're born again. I don't doubt them. But when it comes to actually doing things that cost them something, they're not. And they're full of peace and joy and happiness, just as happy as anybody you would ever meet. There is rest, however, in following Jesus. And that peace that he's going to give is that peace that comes from knowing that your life and my life actually means something here in this world for somebody else besides ourselves. That we're doing something that actually makes a difference in the world for the sake of the gospel. We've got the new gospel, which is the one that makes me happy. I don't find that one in the Bible anywhere. I really don't. The new gospel may make us happy because the new gospel will keep us from being opposed. But the gospel that the Bible gives us shows me that if I'm following the Lord, I'm going to be opposed. And it's going to cost me something. You remember in the text, most of the text is a prayer that the crowd is offering to the Lord. You could label that prayer, you could title it, God help us. That's a good way to title that prayer because that's all they're doing. We come to a gathering like this and all of us come with different needs, different things going on in our lives, different expectations. There's only one sermon, unfortunately, I guess, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. And we're hearing it, and we come to this gathering and we leave here in many different conditions. For instance, some people leave here perplexed. What in the world was he talking about? That's not bad, really. Maybe we're so perplexed that we actually leave here and think about it a little bit. That might be good. Or we leave here moderately amused. You know, that was a good song. I really liked that song. The air conditioner was nice too. And they had coffee. So we're kind of moderately amused by the moments that we have here. Or maybe we're troubled. I don't know that that's always a bad thing. We talk about the gospel and we say the gospel is there to comfort the afflicted, but also to afflict the comfortable. I think that it has both of those views in mind. So maybe troubled is not a bad thing. We might go away from here and be changed somehow. Or stirred. Stirred's a good thing if we leave here stirred. And how about filled? That one seems like a really good one. Well, you know, the outcome to what we do here is not up to me, and it's not up to God. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. I mean, we can come to something like this forever. And if we aren't willing to really soak in and participate, then not much is going to happen here. If we just spectate, I don't know. I think about it in terms of things like Sunday school. If we're in Sunday school and our Sunday school is a discussion, and it's not stirring anybody to think, I want to talk about X. What do you mean by that? What about this? In other words, if there's not an exchange or a participation, then we're just kind of spectating in a way. Not everybody, because I know some people are just very reticent to participate. I'm not saying that, because there's thinking going on too. But if we're not even at the level of the thought, I just say, why do we bother coming? These people came back to this gathering with an expectation that God was going to do something, and it says the place was shaken when they prayed. We've lost, in our country, to a large extent, we've lost the picture of the congregational life of, this is the congregation where I will choose to stay and be used. That's gone away. And it becomes more of what a friend of mine calls the church of what's happening now. I'm not getting anything here, so I'm going to go elsewhere. And that becomes a life spent with an insatiable desire to be entertained. Insatiable. You know, if in this congregation, and I say this with all seriousness, if there's deficiency in what we're doing, please tell the management. Don't just sit there with it. Don't just live with it. You take that for what it's worth. I remember once I was in a congregational setting, and a friend of mine felt very much called to do something in the service. And it was one of these services where everybody's wearing a suit and tie and fancy clothes. And if somebody over here sneezed twice, all 500 heads turned that way to see what was going on. You know, it's just so quiet. It's so, the only word I'm going to put to it is stiff. It was stiff. I mean, you could cut the stiffness in there with a knife. And my friend felt called to get up in the middle of the service. Now, this never happens in this kind of service, you know. And he did something in the service that everybody in the place saw. Well, the next day they had their normal Monday night or Sunday night or Wednesday night meeting where people could talk about congregational things. And this one person stood up and said, I just want to say that what he did yesterday in the service ruined my worship. And I thought, the first thought, I was there at the meeting, and I remember the first thought that came to my head was, oh, so it was all about you then. The whole worship service was about you. This whole prayer, if you took this whole text we just read today and read it and said, I want to put a caption there, it would be God help us. That would be the title of that prayer. We're as dependent on Him as Jesus was dependent on Him, as the disciples were dependent on Him. And we give out of ourselves from an abundance of the Spirit of God in us. And if the abundance is not being filled, there's nothing to give out. And so we return to this setting, not to check a box, I went to church Sunday, not to say pump hands and give hugs. Those are all good things. It's good that we're together. It's good that we have friendships. It's good that we have these social interactions. Those are all good. But the real reason we're hopefully here is because we're expecting God to do something here in us. If we're not wanting to be refilled by God, then why do we bother coming? D.L. Moody said it well. He said, we are leaky vessels, and we are. And so we come back to get filled back up. I hope. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I said anything about which you've got to